Well, what's going on, guys? This is Carl with the Racerred channel. Today I wanted to talk to you about... Oh, by the way, it's a beautiful day, and it doesn't even make sense. How could it be this beautiful out when the last few weeks have been frozen inversion and just iced over, and suddenly the sun comes out and it's just beautiful. It's really, really nice out. So I am very happy to see it, and I'll definitely go for a ride, that's for sure. But today I was going to talk about an audiobook that I just listened to, which was called Under the Banner of Heaven. And to give you guys a little bit of background, I like to talk about religious stuff. I consider myself to be a non-LDS, non-Catholic, just Christian. I'm a Christian. That said, I don't consider myself to be anti any of those things. I just have trouble with them logically when I'm talking about it, and we should be able to talk about it, right? We should be able to openly discuss all of this stuff and not get mad at each other or hold something so close that we're married to it. We should be able to get new ideas and pivot and turn. Now, that's what I've always said, and when it comes to Christianity, I've never been able to find too much fault in it. In the original, like the New Testament, Jesus had said, this is the final text. Any text after this will be a false prophet. There will be many false prophets after this. And I still believe that. I mean, that's what I go by. And when it comes to all these other ones, it gets pretty sketchy, especially when people they find themselves in a position of a power that is undeniable, and they start to use that power to sleep with women and all kinds of stuff. And that's really where I think a cult comes in. When it becomes a cult to me, and I don't even consider it, is when the guy starts sleeping with women, especially other people's women, and saying that God demands it. And that's exactly what Joseph Smith did. He went around, he started sleeping with multiple women. His wife was really mad about it. His friends were mad about it. In fact, his best friend tried to convince him to stop doing it. He got really mad at his best friend, and he went to his best friend's wife and said, I command you, and God commands you to become my plural wife. And that became a huge part of that religion up until like the 70s, really. The church, the government essentially made the church stop doing it. And that was the cause of a lot of battles for them in the past. Joseph Smith was a very good showman. He was a very, very good showman. He was the type of guy that could go into a room and light it up with his smile and his charismatic personality. Lots of alternative religions were attempting to come to light during that time. Lots of people attempted it, but Joseph Smith was particularly good at coming into a room and just lighting it up. And when he officially wrote the script, I could be getting some of these details slightly wrong, and I know people are going to hop all over me when I do, but he was telling his neighbor to write down, the book of, I think, Lehi or something like that. And the guy took it home to his wife. The wife hid it and said, okay, if it's true, then he'll be able to do it exactly the same way a second time. Then Joseph Smith said, oh, well, God's angry, but he'll give me another story. It's going to be basically the same story, but not the same. And his neighbor was still totally convinced. So, I mean, that right there to me is so sketchy. I was just watching a South Park episode that made fun of that. Actually, it was like a YouTube short of a South Park episode that explained that whole situation. And it's a true situation. That's really what happened. There's also lots of stuff like Matt, I think his name is Matt Hoffman, or Mark Hoffman. I don't know, I could be getting that name wrong, but he was a guy who was really good at finding historical documents, and he also made a lot of documents up. He would counterfeit all kinds of stuff. And this guy was selling them to, these guys are going so slow. He was selling them to the Mormon Church, and the Mormon Church, they were taking them and putting them in a vault. And if you look at the investigations surrounding Mark Hoffman, basically everybody was Mormon who was involved. In fact, even the guy, so the FBI, I think it was, they found that the White Salamander letter was actually a real document. So all the experts went through this and they found that it was a real document. The Mormons had a guy look into it that was a Mormon, and he found officially that it was not, it was a counterfeit. Now that said, I don't know whether it was counterfeit or real, but there were a lot of documents that ended up being found, and it was over 400, like I said, but the Mormon Church locked them up, and they would not allow anybody to see them. In fact, a security guard, they hired professional security to safeguard these documents because they didn't want anything coming out. And the security guard, he went and picked up one of the books and looked in it, and one of the guys in the presidency, or one of the higher ups, saw him and immediately fired him. So they were not messing around. They didn't want anybody seeing any of these documents, which this Hoffman guy was really good at finding historical documents. He didn't counterfeit all 400. But the church was very closely controlling how it was perceived, and they didn't want any information countering the Book of Mormon. And so that kind of behavior, to me, right there, is just like a nail in the coffin for me personally. I'm like, well, you guys are like clearly hiding a lot of stuff. Not only that, but it's the richest church in the United States by far, with, I think it was $100 billion they have, because they've set it up so that their members have to pay tithing, otherwise they're not in good standing, and they can't even go to the special temple area, which has all kind of rituals and stuff that Jesus never talked about. But I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. I don't have any problem with Mormons. I think the Mormon people are really friendly, and I get along with them really well. And my issue comes up when it comes to the church, the larger church body, which has become an absolute juggernaut. And from the beginning, it really was that. I mean, Joseph Smith, like I said, he was a showman, and he started sleeping with these underage girls, and some of which were not underage, but he started sleeping with lots of them. Trust me, it's historical record that he did do that. And see, a lot of people don't know that because they're getting their information from within, and that, here's the problem. Like a guy like me, I'll get information from the church, but I'll also get it from outside sources, historical record. This is what people wrote down in their journals. There's all kinds of historical record that has been proven to be legitimate. And so he actually was sleeping with lots of people, and he thought that, you know, if this whole thing felt so good, how could it be against God? And so he essentially made it a part of the church. And the original church had a lot of racist stuff as well. I didn't realize that if you married a black man as a white female, that you would be killed on sight. That was a automatic death penalty. That's crazy. And so there's still fundamentalist factions, I guess you'd call them. There are still LDS fundamentalists that go by the original beliefs of the church, and they still practice polygamy, and lots of it is forced polygamy, unfortunately. And back then, Joseph Smith had all these teenage girls and everything, but that was the norm back then anyways. In fact, it was the norm for our grandparents. Like, I don't consider that abnormal. What I do consider abnormal is all the forced, there's too much forceful nature to it. There's coercion. There's using God to say, basically, I command you to do this, and if you don't, you're going to hell. And that's essentially how they would get multiple wives. I was wondering how they did it, because I was like, hey, if I went and asked multiple women if they'd be my wife, I think that one would say yes and the rest would say you're crazy, and then the one that did say yes would divorce me because she was jealous. Life doesn't work as that had worked for them. And so essentially they were all forced into it by saying, hey, if you don't, looks like you're going to hell. And so it was a wild time. And Joseph Smith eventually, so they went to Missouri. He felt called by God to go to Missouri because that's where they believe Adam and Eve resided, which is historically inaccurate. If you look at anybody else, if you listen to anybody else, that's historically inaccurate. And the Indians are not the Israelites either. They supposedly were cursed with dark skin, and then they forgot their history. But blood work has been done on their genetics, and the Indians have nothing to do with the Jews. So there's that. There are just so many. If you look at it and just plain as day look at it, it's clearly not telling the truth. Now, there's been a lot of people. So one of the things that they use is, okay, we'll pray about it and pray to God for the truth, and then the truth will be revealed to you. And so people go pray, and their intuition jumps in, and suddenly they think that they're tricking and lying to each other constantly. And so the big problem over there right now is a member of the church will work with another member of the church, and there's such a trust there between everybody that they get defrauded very easily. And that's something that was mentioned in this book, is that there's on average like millions and millions of dollars lost to fraud every month in Utah because of members of the church overly trusting other members, and they get scammed out of money. Pretty wild. But so going back to when Joseph Smith was going into Missouri, and he felt called to that land, and he felt that was their land. God told him that was his land. He went there and he said that he put a statement out which caused a war, essentially. He said that this is now our land, and it's also currently the land of the Gentiles, our enemies. And so anybody that wasn't part of the Mormon church was their enemy in their eyes. And this is before any of the drama, really. And what really set things off is when Joseph Smith, he grabbed another teenage girl, slept with her, and I believe it was, I'm foggy on whose daughter it was. I believe it was a doctor's daughter. And they really got pissed at him in Missouri, and they went with a group of people. They were going to castrate him. They pulled him out of his bed at night, they ripped his clothes off, and they were going to castrate him, but the doctor didn't have the stomach for it. Once Joseph Smith was all sprawled out on this board. And so, even though they were really pissed, they showed mercy on him. So they tarred and feathered him instead, and they left him out there. And so this was kind of how it started, and how everything started to roll into a war, a full-blown war, where it kept going back and forth, where these Mormon groups would get beat up, and one or two of them killed, and then the Mormon groups would go out, beat up one of the people in the town, or a whole bunch of people in the town, and it started into an oblivion. And then the LDS newspaper came out and said that the Mormons would walk on the ashes of their enemies in Missouri. And so the enemy being the Gentiles, which is essentially the Christians, the non-LDS Christians, they viewed this as a declaration of war. And the most recent raid, the citizens called to the governor because they said that the Mormons had killed 50 of their people who were unarmed. This was not true. The Mormons actually killed like 5 or something like that. But the state of Missouri was like, okay, it's time to eradicate these guys. These guys are extremist faction, essentially. And so the state of Missouri sent their militia out to the Mormon settlement and just slaughtered them in the mill. I can't remember what that was called. The something mill massacre. Eventually Joseph Smith saw that they were going to get annihilated, and so he went to the governor and said, what do I have to do? And essentially the state of Missouri wanted the Mormons out of their state, and they wanted them to disarm themselves and get out of their state, and also to give back the money, all the money that they took from the towns, like the stuff that they had destroyed, all the buildings and all that stuff. And so Joseph Smith eventually did flee. He said he was going to do that, but then he actually escaped the jail that they put him in, and then he fled to another state. I can't remember, Virginia? Maybe it was Virginia. And what's weird is eventually he became like emperor of a town. He had like full rule over the town, and he ran it like a tyrant, essentially. Anybody who was not LDS was not welcome. And this guy that ran a printing press, he was going to expose the inner workings of Joseph Smith's church. He was going to expose them because he was actually on their side for a long time, and he knew what was going on. And so Joseph Smith and his militia that he had for that town, I guess. Oh, by the way, Joseph Smith ran for president and lost horribly. That's something I didn't know. But anyways, he went and ransacked that guy's printing press business. They destroyed all of his equipment and burned down the building. And the guy, Joseph Smith, owned the courts and everything at that time. He was super powerful. And so they totally destroyed that guy's business before he could ever put out a single paper. They burned all the paper and everything. And that started a whole nother thing. I mean, there were so many people pissed off at Joseph Smith by that time because of so many daughters taken, so much. A lot of the journals from that day say that the Mormons were pompous, self-righteous, pompous jerks, essentially, and they were the only righteous ones, and they were the favored children of God. And so they had this aggression towards anybody who was not LDS. That's what all the journals say from back then, essentially. And so they were mad. I mean, all the people were mad at that point. And eventually it led to Joseph Smith's demise. And anyways, the Book of Mormon lives to this day, and there's lots of evidence against it. They've changed the Jesus that's in the Bible completely. It's a different Jesus. They view him as a brother, and it's very, very strange. And then also, they believe that you can become your own God after you die. That was one of the revelations, is that you can, not only is God a human, or God was a human, but you yourself can become just like God and have your own universe. Pretty crazy stuff. Now, I've got a lot of Mormon followers, I'm sure, and any information you guys want to add to this, or maybe say some of it maybe not true or whatever, I'm totally okay with that. Like I said, I think we should be able to have a discussion about this stuff, and have a logical discussion, and not get mad over it. And if the information leads you to a different area, then take it. But personally, what I see is, like, if you argue it, and this is probably with any religion, but if you argue it and you become on the other side of it, then suddenly you are an apostate, a Gentile, or a, what else do they call them? Somebody who's not in favor, in the Lord's favor. The Muslims would say they put a jihad on you because you're infidel. And so during the times of war, Joseph Smith made some connections between Mormonism and Islam. And he said, during the time of war, he said, as Muhammad said, it's either Islam or the sword, I say now it's either Mormon or the sword. And so, yeah, there's definitely some similarities. Anyways, guys, I've probably made some people really angry, but I hope that most of you enjoyed it and learned something new. And I think the history of that church is really entertaining. It's like just this crazy story. I mean, if you haven't seen Under the Banner of Heaven, if you haven't read it, I mean, I would highly recommend it. It's an audio book. It's on paper, obviously. You can go and check it out. It really tells a wild story with true eyewitness accounts throughout. And it gives references of people's diaries that they used to tell the story. The author actually interviewed some of the top Mormon leaders, and he also interviewed some of the ones who are in prison. The Mormons, he interviewed one of the guys who ended up murdering a bunch of people. But yeah, pretty crazy. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. This is the R1 video for the week. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.